So how would you fancy an intimate evening with myself and Niall, where we're going to be chatting all about talking with criminals and you're going to ask us some questions? We'll be performing our brand new show, Look Who's Talking, live in Kilkenny this weekend on Saturday the 17th of May at the Pembroke Hotel at 8 o'clock. Very limited tickets are available on www.kilkennylawfestival.com. This torturous Richard Satchwell long interview continues in the aftermath of the discovery of his wife's body at their home in Youghal, and he's coming under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, well, he's already been challenged about his statements to the guards, and in particular, the moment of how Tina Satchwell comes to be dead. We've heard his story many times now, but she came flying at him with a chisel. He ended up on his back. He was trying to restrain her with a belt, which is now a dressing gown belt. Yeah. And then during this, then she passed away. Now the state's saying he murdered her, and this is his version of events. So he's in this is Friday the 13th of October, 2023. So at this stage, the post-mortem is pretty much wrapped up.
Yeah.
I think there is still something to happen on the Friday morning. Which was already said in evidence, that there was, I think, some of the certification was done on that date. But in the meantime, like he's still going through this, and this is at 2 o'clock, and so he's been asked, if there's anything he wants to say, and he wants to make a few little amendments, and he apologises to the Garda interviewer David Noonan, who he called a liar the day before, and he apologised to him for calling him a liar. And then he's told by Detective Noonan, we have photographs we'd like to show you. And before he's even told what they are, he said, look, if it's Tina's body, I'm not going to look. I want to remember her how she was, not how I made her. I respectfully ask not to be put in that situation. So that's his reply to the initial being told you're here to look at photographs. But he's told then, look, it's about changes to the ground floor. And he's asked, when I say the ground floor, about the arrangement of the furniture and what was there in 2017 compared to the different photographs, so they're shown. So the first photograph they show him is from Christmas in 2016. So this is, December 2016, and we know she died on the 20th or 19th or 20th of March 2017. And there's a picture of Tina sitting on a couch. He mentions it was one of the first time they took pictures outdoors that day. They had gone out. And he's asked then, they gave him back this map that he had already previously drawn, and he's asked to kind of mark where the couches were, the bird cage, and describing, the 4 chairs and a table. And there's another, when he's shown the picture then, when he sees the picture, there was another sofa, and he kind of said, I forgot that was actually there. And he's explaining where he bought them, and one of them it came from the Littlewoods catalogue, which we know was 4,500 overdrawn, which again we'll find out again. He tells somebody that it was 7,000 overdrawn. And he talks again about, one of the couches hadn't a split in it and we got rid of it. He points out there's a Christmas tree in the background. And it's pointed out the house is clean enough.
What time of year was that?
This is Christmas now. This picture is taken, yeah. And it's pointed out that the house is quite clean, and he said, "We accept that," and he said, "It does," and I do, yeah. And he mentioned then, he says, "I like the way you're using my own photos on me." And the Garda asks, says, "Well, how do you mean?" And he says, "Well, ask him questions about photographs I took." Anyway, he says, "Who cleaned the house at this stage?" And he says, at the time I'd be the chief cleaner, I'd be mopping the floors, and if she came down and I missed something, she'd give out to me. And if it wasn't done the way she wanted, she'd do it. I'm not making out she's lazy, it's just the way it was. So this is how he's characterizing the relationship. And he's asked specifically about the furniture, because it's been swapped around. And then he's asked, you remember you put Tina on a couch when she was dead? And he's asked, which one was that? And he's explaining, well, that one is now upstairs in the front room. And he said, he's asked, you don't have to be hesitant about, why you're answering. And he says, well, you're trying to put words in my mouth. And he says, tell us about, he says, you're able to tell us that she put her on the couch after you'd taken her out of the freezer. Why can't you answer, more detail on some of these questions? And he also then, they show him a picture where the original back door is there and there's a glass pane in it, and there's a kind of a whole series of questions about that. And he's asked did you replace the glass? And he said no, he didn't. And he's asked, like, when did he replace the gas? And the solicitor interrupts, who's in the room, says he's answered that twice. And Richard is saying, look, I bought the house with the glass like this. And there's a little bit of exchange like between him and the interviewer. And he's saying, you got woolly ears, I'm not trying to be cocky. And the reply back is, it's not actually cocky, it's actually smart. And then eventually he goes, I've never replaced the glass in that door. I've answered that 3-4 times now. I think that's the response you wanted, me getting smart. So anyway, they move on to, there's questions about a photograph of the bathroom before he had made changes to it, and he's asked about that. And he's talking about it in general. He's saying, like, he was trying to get rid of memories, all of it. That he wanted to rediscover himself. He was operating on automatic, and he's asked then again about the marks to the wall that Tina would have made when she was, in his narrative, was scraping it when he came in and surprised her. And so he was asked to, kind of point out in the photograph where she was, and where the marks were. And he points to a place behind one of the spindles on the banisters, so you can't actually see where the marks are in the photograph. And the interviewer kind of takes him up on this. He said, this is what happens when we produce evidence. People make a slight maneuver and try and incorporate it into the story. And he says, you said yesterday that you had nothing to lose. You have a lot to lose, he's told. And the story you're telling us is not making sense. I have to point out, all of a sudden, Tina is now bent over and using a chisel. And then compared to what he had previously said, that he walks in and startled her and she flew at him. And he said, look, he said... And Richard says, I said, look, I'm trying to please. He says, you're not. You're trying to protect yourself and the new story you're telling us. He said, the evidence will speak for itself. In the interview the night before, the guard tells him, like, you tried to allude that you were about to come forward. You were already arrested. We had found Tina. You started to construct your story around what you already knew. And this is what you're doing. It's clear as the nose on my face. Remember, you said, you pointed out where you were standing, and he said, look, I don't need your story. The second story you've come in with has come apart already. So there's this kind of back and forth, or he is, as it's kind of later said in court, these questions are put to him in a challenging way. So he said, so again, a guard, David Noonan, says, I think he's Detective Sergeant David Noonan. He says, you say, like, she flies at me and you were shocked. How were you shocked? He said, you told us that she flies off the handles. She's knocked the glasses off you while you were driving and you do nothing. And now she's bent over at you. She flies out and you fall on your back. He said, can't you see how that sounds? This is your account. These are your words. You said this to me, not me. It's not me doing it. Mm-hmm. And Richard Satchwell, I can see, look, it's your job to tear it apart, to bury me. And the guard again, refutes that and says, it's my job to follow the evidence and find the truth. There's so many things you have come and said that do not add up. It's important that you know these things. You've come in, and on one hand, you're saying she's perfect, and in mid-sentence, the interview stops in front of the jury. So we didn't actually get quite at the end of that.
And because was that for a break, you mean? Or?
No, it was just that's where the video stopped, because they had agreed that certain preliminaries and like he's in again. I think we spoke yesterday on one of them that the interview was 2.5 hours long, but 47 minutes were played to the jury, or not exactly that, but they cut out. It's just a short time. Like there's moments of long silences.
Both sides have agreed are relevant, basically.
And they've already agreed that, and you can see the time clock on the video. So if you're being very diligent, you could actually figure out when the skips have happened, or if you're able to play everything back. So we kind of went in then to some of the Forensic Science Ireland people. So we had so these are the people who've been asked then to look at the DNA profiling. So the first one was Kirsten O'Connor, and she had been...
And what DNA are they looking at?
Well, first of all, they had the 2 hairbrushes that were taken in the first search in 2017. And then, as well as that, her biological mother sample was taken to compare the hairbrushes and Mary Collins. And then this was then compared again to the samples taken from...
This was in the effort to identify her.
Yeah,
100%.
But this is also part of the 2017 investigation as well. And Kirsten O'Connor said as well that she in September 2017 she examined a vehicle for blood. She treated with Blue Star. This is the blood visualizing agent, like everyone knows of luminol, but this is a different version of it. Nothing was found. And she explaining about, to verify the sample from the hairbrush, they did a kinship analysis, which was taking the mothers, and you'd need a 50% match, and that's what I did. And that it was 130 million times more likely that they were related than not. So that's the top level scale. That's basically as far as DNA can prove it. There was there was another person, San Lee, also from FSI, also did a report. And she was actually the scientist who did the exact, she did the DNA profile of the human remains that have now been found and extracted a sample. And again, it was 130 million times more likely to be Tina Satchwell, right, or the person who is Mary Collins' daughter, the biological mother. And under cross-examination, she was saying, she was given human nails with pink nail polish, and she also had hair as well. And she was able to start with the nail and hair and had a profile by the end of the day, and didn't end up having to use a bone sample that was given, because that can take 5 days.
Right.
So that was how the IFAC people. So there was another scientist as well, Eamon Dillon. She was, again, they were all asked, you were told about the background to this, and this is all yet they agreed. So they were all kind of led through that part of it, that they were working on this particular case. And so Eamon Dillon was given the dressing gown, a cord, and glass particles that were recovered from the remains. Now the gown and the cord, as it was put, were damp and brittle condition and basically not suitable to be forensically examined. And it turns out under cross-examination that what she did was actually she dried them, and that was the extent of it. And she put them back in her packaging, and she couldn't analyze the glass particles because there was nothing to compare it with. In other words, it was just she wouldn't be able to say that these glass shards came from this broken window or this tabletop or whatever it was.
And why can you not, or maybe you aren't able to answer it, I'm sure the jury didn't hear or not, but why could you not analyse something wet?
There was nothing really to explain it. It just said it wasn't possible. I suppose it was in a damp and brittle condition, so presumably this is
disintegrated or whatever. Yeah.
And so we had another scientist as well from FSI, Forensic Science Ireland, did a report, and again aware of the background, what this all was, and he was doing the glass fragments then that were recovered that the previous scientist, and he was examining as what was described as being for informational purposes only. So there was 15 glass fragments. These were actually brought into to court. And he goes through them all, and he says, basically compares them all, and he talks about, the reflective nature is the same in 10 of them. And his conclusion was that they all came from the one source. They were heat treated, so it would shatter into small pieces for safety purposes. He says this kind of coating is also, say, for instance, to stop limescale building up for safety, like tabletops or showers, side rear doors or windows, and doors at homes. So this is where that glass came from. And that was simply just to explain the nature of the glass. There wasn't any, there was nothing in his report to kind of say where it came from.
And of course, you've had Richard Satchwell repeatedly questioned in interview about the panes in a glass door in the house, which
this is early, So they've already
no context for that.
About him, yeah. Now there was these are all wrapped up tightly in plastic, and under cross-examination, Brendan again has said, can we look at these? And they were apparently between 2 and 5 mil. So they basically stopped there so that they could go out and set them up so that the jury could look at them and look at photographs of them. And in the meantime, they read a witness statement from Sarah Dobson, who is another one of these people who knew the Satchwells from the car boot sales. And in her statement, she said, I knew them for 3 years because I sold them Ruby, who was the Chihuahua, when Ruby was 8 or 10 weeks old. And she met them at one of the car boot sales when she was there with all her dogs. And that Tina wanted one of them, but she ended up, she bought Ruby, and she stayed in contact with her close contact with her for years. And they'd meet up at the car boot sales at Rathcormac and Castletown Roach. And when they moved to Youghal, she didn't see them as much. But she remembers then meeting Richard Satchwell on the bank holiday Monday, 2017. So this is May. So Tina is gone at this stage. And she said he had a blanket on the floor. He was selling stuff. He was selling her stuff, boots and bags, jean tops, a jacket for sale, all women's clothes. And she commented to Richard that there was nothing of his for sale. And she noticed in particular there's a Juicy Couture handbag, which she thought was very strange because she loved it. And she'd even bought a matching carrier bag for Ruby. And she says that Satchwell told her she was very ill, that she was in England until he sorted out the walls in the house, and that there was a bacteria which had made her sick and had caused Pearl the parrot to die as well. He didn't say which hospital she was in. He told her that it was going to cost 80 to 100 grand to repair the house, and he had to go back to work to raise money. And he was only getting 6 hours a night of sleep from all the work. And she told him that Richard is going to kill you for selling her stuff. And during this time,
Gina's going to kill you.
Yeah. And she noticed, like, during this interaction, that the dog Ruby, she described as being distressed, was hopping about and cowering from him. And she took Ruby with her for 40 minutes. And when she went back, she wouldn't go back to him initially, you know. And she also thought, she just mentioned, she thought it was strange that that Tina's sister was living in England, because she'd previously been told by Richard that she lived in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And then, so what they get into next then is they start the medical evidence, and initially it's just about, so there's a number of witnesses from Medina Clinic in Fermoy who were basically the GP service, mm-hmm. and then there's just some. We briefly get some of that, and then we break for lunch, and then we have the forensic scientist back with the glass shards. And he's in court with his scissors and gloves, and he's cutting open the packages, and it takes a bit of time. There's a blown up image of the shards put on the screen. They look like, you know, they're described as being 2 to 5 millimeters, and the one that we saw is from the scalp. The first 5 are from the scalp there. And again, in cross examination, he's explained, you know, what to. You know, that it was just for information. It wasn't necessarily there to say where they could have come from, because there wasn't a controlled sample that they could compare. And there was, you know, there was no inference could be drawn from the scientist's point of view about how the glass got there. And then we go back to we continue with the nurse who spoke to Richard at one point, because he had to, if you remember, he was getting these B12 injections, and he had to get 12 of them. And she met him on the 30th of March. And when he was there, he told him that his wife had gone, she was missing. And she says, "What do you mean?" She says, "I don't know where she is." And he'd contacted relatives in Killarney. He said he seemed calm, and he had his dogs with him in a carry pouch, which he put under the chair. And he said, like, she did say, you need to go back to the guards. You need to go to the guards to tell them about this. And he was back then on the 6th of April. And she said, he'd been speaking to the guards, and they didn't seem to be too worried. He also told her about the large sum of money that was missing, and she said something like it was maybe €70,000, and this was in the sale of the house in Fermoy. And she saw him again on the 26th of April, and that was the last time. So she gave him 3 of the, I think, 5 injections that he had to get. And there's a little bit of cross-examination. There's another kind of, I think there was a locum doctor who basically didn't remember him, except that she had, you know, according to the records, she saw him. When she does remember, the only thing is that he came to the clinic with a small dog, and that was all she remembered of her dealings. But the man who started the practice and who was their GP for a long time was Dr. Patrick Burke. And he said he was there, he was the doctor for both of them since 1999. And he says they always consulted. They came in together. He says maybe once or twice in 18 years he saw them on their own. They were always accompanying each other. He said he saw them 8 to times. He saw them frequently, 8 to 12 times some years. One year I think there was only once. And he speaks about he spoke a bit about Tina and said she always enjoyed good general health. Sometimes she had abdominal pain, and he prescribed some medication for irritable bowel syndrome. She was on the pill until 2012, and he was asked that, you know, she didn't have any condition that would cause her to die prematurely. She said she was very friendly, she was open, she was a great communicator. And, you know, if I was asked to kind of give a psychiatric examination, he said there was probably a background of anxiety, but he says it never warranted, it was insufficient to kind of warrant any further kind of attention. And then his dealings with Richard Satchwell, he said he went to speak to him on the 30th of March after the nurse had told him that he'd said his wife was missing. Mm-hmm. And he said, under no circumstance would I have told him, knowing the circumstances of the couple, that he would have told him he was right for not going straight to the guards, and told him to go to the guards. Right. This was on Thursday, the 30th of March 2017. But he's actually already been to the guards. He went to Fermoy on Friday, the 20th of October. So, but officially, it's still not a missing persons case until a good bit later, until I think it was the 17th of May or 11th of May, it was something like that. And then he had a final consultation with him around that time in May. Actually, I think, that was the 11th of May, the final consultation. And based on memory, Dr. Burke said that he told him about his difficulties with Tina and their financial difficulties, their various debts, how he'd been assaulted over her. He said there was no mention of violence prior to the 30th of March. He'd said this then, but he said he took a note this time because, he realised, the circumstances of Tina now being missing. And he said that Satchwell had told him, he took a note, Satchwell told him the violence was frequent and sometimes severe, and on one occasion knocked his teeth out. And he said, again, talking about Littlewoods and owing money to them, his notes were saying he was very, very bothered, and that the gardaí said that he needs medication. He said he seemed more upset about his wife on this occasion. He was very vague about the money she'd taken with him, and it was the first time he'd seen him looking unwell, unkempt, and unshaven, and he didn't see him again after that. And there was a bit of there was a little bit of confusion in some of the evidence about another doctor that he would have seen, and they was trying to explain that, this doctor was somebody who sometimes would see some of his medical card patients if he was on holidays. So it's possible that, it's quite possible that he did see this doctor. He mixed up his dates in his statement to the guards. He said that he'd spoken to him on the 24th of March, but he said it wouldn't have been because he was away. And he said, look, that was 7 years after, like when he gave the statement. And he said it was put to him like, you took the info from the gardaí that this is dated from your records, that he had been at the thing, and you didn't get 4. I certainly didn't get 4 out of that. Put two together, he didn't get 4. And he said they were almost exclusively always together. They lived on my side of Fermoy, and I always saw them together. So he said it was extraordinarily unusual to be seeing Richard on his own. And he was asked, like, do you ever have occasion to deal with battered wives? He says many, and he said it was rare for battered husbands. We don't see the evidence as commonly. He said, but he wouldn't necessarily be getting any background information because he didn't have any dealings with Tina's family. And he said Richard has no family in Fermoy. And so at this stage, she's missing 2 months, and so he prescribed some anti-anxiety and tablets. And that was more or less it. There was a brief moment then, he asked, can he say something? And Brendan Grehan said to him, it's probably a bad idea, and the judge is shaking his head.
Oh, right, that was today in the court.
And he hands him a piece of paper, and look at the X's, he says. So the jury were sent out at this point. And then when the jury are back in, it starts again, and Brendan again said, in the course of your treatment, he said, this is, did you ever note any injuries that he may have suffered? And he said on this piece of paper, he'd highlighted potential injuries or potential injuries, and that there was 5 indications. And these were kind of things like musculoskeletal problems, painful right wrist, irritation of the left eye, small bruising. And there was nothing, there was no cross-examination on that. As well, Brendan Grehan was doing the cross-examination, and Geraldine Small did come back to, what's the word when they re-examine, they look for, she had 1 or 2 questions, and it was just to get a nature of some.
And she kind of reviewed it.
Yeah. And then the final witness of the day then was Detective Garda David Kelleher. So this is the officer who was the incident room coordinator. And Brendan Grehan, it was really, he was now cross-examining him because David Kelleher was the witness who was producing the videos that the jury were seeing, even though it was Garda David Noonan who was doing the interview. So he was asked. He was asked about it, and he said the tone. Counsel for Satchwell, Brendan Grehan, said the tone is very different to the previous ones, and he feels that the officer isn't answering his questions, and the detective then says yes, he was asked challenging questions, as in Satchwell was asked challenging questions by his colleague, and he said he was asked. Grehan says he was asked several questions about where he changed glass in the door, and was that glass that was in the door, was that ever sent for forensic exam? And he said no, it wasn't. He said Grehan again, he says that Satchwell had described where Tina had been scraping plasterboard with a black and red chisel, and was that red chisel found? And he said it was secured. And he says, like, you know, why didn't you go also as well go back and take immediate pictures of us at the time, you know, to look at these. And so this is kind of he's asking as well about the manicure kit. He said, was this ever located? And he's frustrated with some of the guards' kind of answers to his questions. It's very difficult to ask questions when you won't answer what you're asked. You've told us that you were the incident room coordinator. Will you try again to answer the question? So this is one of the kind of
touchy moments.
The touchy moments and the manicure kit. And he was asking it again, look, was there, you know, were the guys doing the interview, did they have earpieces in? And he was outside monitoring, you know, were they in communication? He says, no, it wasn't this kind of, you know, he says he's not a level 3 interviewer and can't, you know, he wouldn't be intervening in the type of interviews where that would happen. And he says, like, so what's the object, or what's the point of you being an observer? Are you taking notes? And again, it was a kind of a texty exchange, but that was more or less the end of the trial for the day. And the judge, he tells the jury then that there is a legal issue that they have to sort out, and that they won't be required until Monday on the 12th. And it reminds them all again that they're still serving members of the jury and not to talk to anyone else. So there will be, we're going to hear more again, but it won't be till next week now.
Yeah, okay. So that's it wrapped up really until Monday at least of next week, and tomorrow's legal argument, which we cannot report on because the jury won't be in position to hear it. And is there anything else different there today, or are you seeing any emotions really from him or anything?
No. I mean, he hasn't
he's been pretty steady, hasn't he, since the beginning of it? And like, we're on to day 11, 10.
Day 11.
Day 11.
Week 3.
Yeah, week 3, exactly. So it's a long
That's the end
process.
of week 3, so to speak, yeah.
Yeah.
They're getting through it. Like, I mean, I suppose a lot of it is quite complicated. You know, like, I mean, when you're listening to some of the forensic people yesterday, a lot of the terminology was this highly academic and medical terminology, which was, you know, they had to be led through to explain that in terms that journalists, not to mention the jury, can understand.
Yeah.
So it's methodical, and you know, and it's supposed to give every opportunity to any defendant that, you know, this has gone through, and then, you know, his legal team, of course, have the opportunity then as well to kind of point out any what they might see as inconsistencies or anything that would help their client.
Okay. All right, Eamon, we will leave it until next week. Thanks very much.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
Yeah. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.